There's a version of Simone Biles that the world thinks it knows. The version with 4 gold medals draped around her neck in Rio. The version who landed skills so technically extreme that gymnastics federations had to name them after her just to acknowledge they existed. But lately, a different version of Simone Biles has been appearing in people's feeds, and it has nothing to do with chalk-dusted hands or competition floors. It has to do with hospital wristbands, a quiet Instagram post, and a caption that stopped millions of people cold. The story of what is happening with Simone Biles right now cannot be separated from everything that came before it. Because in her case, the past has never truly stopped pressing against the present. The news broke the way most things do these days, not through a formal statement or a press conference, but through a social media post that felt almost accidental in its honesty. Biles shared an image on her Instagram stories showing multiple hospital wristbands wrapped around her wrist, the kind of detail that is almost impossible to misinterpret. Alongside it, she wrote words that cut straight through any ambiguity. She said that nearly dying had not been on her schedule for that particular week. It was dry, it was dark, and it was entirely characteristic of the way she has always chosen to communicate when things get serious. She does not spiral into lengthy explanations. She makes a single statement and lets the world sit with it. In this case, the world did not sit quietly. Within hours, the speculation spread across every platform, filling the silence she had intentionally left around the details of what actually happened. No medical specifics followed. No physician released a statement. No governing body weighed in. No team spokesperson clarified anything. The only account that existed was her own, and confirmed only one thing with certainty. Whatever occurred was severe enough to require hospital care and a period of recovery at home afterward. What made the moment land even harder emotionally was the other detail she chose to share, almost in the same breath. Her husband, Jonathan Owens, the NFL safety she married in 2023, was not with her. His professional obligations had taken him elsewhere, and she had faced emergency alone. That detail, small as it might seem in the broader picture, said something significant about the particular kind of pressure that accumulates when you are one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet. The people closest to you cannot always be where you need them, because your life is built around 2 careers, 2 schedules, and 2 sets of demands that do not always align. Simone Biles is 28 years old and in what should be the controlled, experienced phase of an already legendary career. She is not a teenager navigating the chaos of early elite competition. She is someone who has competed at multiple Olympic cycles, who has executed vault combinations that were previously considered physically impossible for women's gymnastics, and who has spent more than a decade managing her body like the extraordinary instrument it is. And yet here she is, posting hospital wristbands and talking about narrow escapes. Anyone paying attention to the full arc of her life understands that this is not the first time the ground has shifted beneath her. In fact, the ground has been shifting beneath Simone Biles since before she was old enough to understand what stability meant. She was born in Columbus, Ohio, in March of 1997, and the early years of her life were defined not by gymnastics routines or medal ceremonies, but by instability that most people watching her perform today would find difficult to imagine. Her biological mother, Shannon Biles, was unable to provide the consistent care that young children need, caught in the grip of substance dependency that made daily life unpredictable and unsafe. The children were eventually taken into the foster care system, and Simone and her younger sister moved through that system during a period of their lives when children most need permanence. It was not a brief disruption. It was years of shifting caregivers, of routines that could not hold, of a family structure that had fractured beyond what the children inside it could fully comprehend. The turning point came through her maternal grandfather, Ron Biles, and his wife, Nellie, who made a decision to adopt Simone and her sister and relocate the family to Spring, Texas, in the greater Houston area. What that adoption provided was not just legal permanence, but something more difficult to name: the conditions under which a child can actually become themselves. Ron Biles had served in the Air Force, and Nellie worked as a nurse. Their household was structured, disciplined, and stable in ways that the earlier years of Simone's life had not been. She could attend the same school consistently. She could commit to activities without the threat of interruption. She had adults in her corner who were going to stay there. Gymnastics entered the picture through something as ordinary as a daycare field trip. The children visited a gym, and the coaches there noticed what Simone was doing almost immediately. There was a quality to her movement, an instinctive coordination and explosive power that stood out even in a room full of children bouncing around on their own energy. She was enrolled in formal training at Bannon's Gymnastics, beginning work with coach Amy Borman, and progression that followed was almost inevitable in retrospect, though it must have felt like one uncertain step after another at the time. By the time she reached adolescence, she had transitioned from local youth programs into elite training environments, and the girl who had spent her earliest years without a stable home was now building something extraordinary inside one of the most physically demanding sports on earth. What Simone Biles did to women's gymnastics over the decade that followed her emergence on the senior elite scene is not easily summarized without reaching for words like unprecedented, because ordinary superlatives genuinely fall short. She arrived at the 2013 World Championships in Antwerp at 16 years old and placed at or near the top of every event she entered. She won 4 medals in her first World Championships appearance, including gold in the all-around and on-floor exercise, and the gymnastics world understood almost immediately that it was looking at something it had not encountered before. The margins by which she won were not the margins of a talented athlete outperforming the competition. They were the margins of someone operating in a different category of difficulty, while simultaneously maintaining execution quality that most athletes cannot achieve at lower difficulty levels. The years between Antwerp and the Rio Olympics in 2016 became a sustained demonstration of dominance. She accumulated world titles across multiple apparatuses, consistently winning by gaps that forced judges and federations to re-examine what a winning routine was supposed to look like. She introduced skills so technically complex that the governing body of the sport had to assign them her name once she completed them successfully in major international competition. The Yurchenko double pike vault, eventually designated Biles 2, requires a gymnast to launch off a springboard, complete a round-off entry onto the vault table, and then perform 2 full backward somersaults in a pike position before landing. The forces involved are extraordinary. The margin for error is almost non-existent. She trained it until it looked controlled. Behind all of that visible achievement was a training environment that the public rarely sees clearly, one built on repetition, at extreme physical intensity, on multiple daily sessions, on landing after landing after landing, until the joints and tendons and muscles are absorbing forces that reach many multiples of body weight. Elite gymnastics at the level Biles operates is not a sport where you train a skill until it feels comfortable and then move on. It is a sport where you train at a level above competition in order to make competition feel manageable. The physical cost of that process accumulates invisibly until it does not. By the time she arrived in Rio and won 4 gold medals and a bronze, cementing herself as one of the most decorated athletes at those games, that accumulation had been building for years. What happened next is a chapter in her story that no medal count can fully capture. In January 2018, as the legal proceedings against Larry Nassar, the former USA Gymnastics national team physician, were reaching their sentencing phase, Simone Biles publicly identified herself as one of the survivors of his abuse. Nassar had operated within the elite gymnastics pipeline for years, using his medical authority as cover for the systematic abuse of athletes in his care. More than 150 women provided impact statements during sentencing hearings. Nassar received a federal sentence of 60 years for separate charges before being sentenced to 40 to 175 years in Michigan State Prison. The scale of what happened inside USA Gymnastics, an institution that was supposed to protect the athletes it governed, became undeniable. Biles had been part of the national team system during the years when this was happening. She had competed under that system's oversight, trained in the environments it controlled, and trusted the medical personnel it employed. Her decision to come forward publicly was not made in a vacuum. It was made while she was still actively competing, still carrying the expectations of a sport and a country that looked to her as its standard bearer, and still processing a betrayal that had occurred within the very structure that was supposed to support her. She spoke at congressional hearings about institutional failures, about the ways governing bodies had prioritized reputation and results over athlete safety. Her statements were precise and unflinching, and they shifted the public conversation from individual criminal accountability toward the systemic conditions that had allowed the abuse to persist. Then came Tokyo, the 2020 Olympics, delayed by a year because of the pandemic, took place in the summer of 2021 inside a surreal environment with no spectators in many venues, compressed schedules, and a particular psychological weight of a competition that had been suspended and restarted while the world was still in crisis. For Biles, the rupture came during the women's team final. She completed a vault attempt and immediately communicated distress after landing. What she was experiencing had a name in gymnastic circles, the twisties, but that name does not fully convey what the condition actually involves. It is not fatigue. It is not hesitation. It is a temporary disconnection between the internal spatial mapping that aerial skills depend on and the actual physical execution of those skills in the air. A gymnast experiencing the twisties cannot reliably know where her body is during rotation before she reaches the ground. In a sport where the difference between a clean landing and a catastrophic neck or spinal injury depends on that knowledge, continuing to compete is not a question of mental toughness. It is a question of survival. She withdrew from the team final and from subsequent individual events. The United States finished second in the team competition. The reaction globally was immediate and sharply divided. Many people who had spent years watching her perform at an almost inhuman level of excellence were genuinely confused by the withdrawal, which is itself a reflection of how completely we had come to take her capabilities for granted. Supporters, including sports psychologists and fellow athletes from multiple disciplines, understood what she had done and why. Critics framed it as a failure of competitive commitment. Neither group was fully accounting for everything that had been building for years: the physical accumulation, the institutional trauma, the pressure of being expected to deliver at the highest possible level, while carrying the weight of things no one watching from the outside could see. She returned for one event, the balance beam final, and performed a simplified routine compared to her usual competition construction. She reduced the difficulty, limited the highest-risk skills, and delivered a composed performance under conditions that would have broken most people. She won bronze. More than the medal, what that routine represented was something harder to define: the act of returning to the thing that had been disrupted and doing it anyway, on different terms, with different understanding of what was possible that day. In the years since Tokyo, Biles has spoken openly about therapy, anxiety, and the cumulative toll of competing under scrutiny that extends far beyond sport. She has been transparent about the psychological demands in ways that very few athletes at the peak of their careers choose to be. She married Jonathan Owens in 2023, returned to elite competition, and continued to push the boundaries of what her sport considered achievable. She has presented, publicly and consistently, the image of someone who has found a way to hold multiple truths at once: the truth of being genuinely extraordinary and the truth of being genuinely human, which brings everything back to those hospital wristbands and that quiet, unsettling caption about almost dying. The details remain undisclosed. The medical specifics have not emerged. What is visible is a 28-year-old woman who has been navigating extraordinary pressure since childhood, who survived institutional betrayal, who stepped away from Olympic competition at the exact moment when the world expected her to compete regardless of personal cost, and who is now facing another unspecified crisis in the middle of a career that has already redefined what is possible in her sport. She did it alone, without her husband present. She told the world in 12 words, and then went quiet. That pattern, the willingness to be honest about difficulty while maintaining boundaries around the specific details, is entirely consistent with who she has always been. The question of where she goes from here does not have an answer yet. What is certain is that she has been in harder places than this before, and she has found a way through every one of them.